Eddie Zapata is my assistant. He would go get some artifacts that we're going to show you that we found at Callahan. As you well know, Callahan was a very vibrant city. We're going to talk a little bit about that. We've got some pictures to show you. We've done this research extensively for 1 year. 1 year research to find out, and talking to the people, what happened to the town. You're going to see how vibrant the town was. It was bigger at one time than Three Rivers and Georgia West. Very vibrant community, had its own newspaper agency, it had its own cafes, hotels, and we're going to show you what happened to the town. When I refer to Old Callahan, it's meaning to the old town of what it was. This here is not a picture of Old Callahan. It's actually off the Chamber of Commerce website, but it's going to show you what the structures look like at that time. Callahan, Texas was originally known as Tufolia. The settlement was originally known for Herman Harvey McGuffey, who owned a store on the site. In that store, he supplied cowboys, chuck wagons with whatever they needed. Coffee, beans, those were the main things that he supplied out of his little store. This is not the house, like I said, but this is what the structures looked like during the 1800s. Us as historians more or less look like there was no insulation in these houses whatsoever. But when we took when they actually took that last house down, we'll talk about that in Callahan, Texas, the last house they took down, it was like you're going back in history because the insulation they used in there was old newspapers. And it started around 1904 or so forth when World War I was basically going to take off. And the very back room that they tore down ended November 22nd, 1963, when JFK was assassinated. And it just walked you through the history. The way they made those houses from the 1800s up into the 1920s, there were just planks of wood that were just basically put together, so forth. And they needed something for the wind to not go through there. So they would put old newspaper up onto if you've ever been to the San Antonio Historical Commission over there, at University of Texas has it at San Antonio, they have a replica of a house like this where they did put up newspaper. And then they put chicken wire to keep that paper in place. And then put other plank boards across that. And this was one of the last houses that this is not the actual picture, but this is what the house looked like at that time period. Old Callahan hits it big. In 1908, Charles Bryan, a rancher, was drilling a water well in his ranch. He not only found water, but also high pressurized natural gas. This is not Charles Bryan for the record. This is actually Mr. Callahan. He set up a store. He was known as a bootlegger that actually took off and made it real successful because he actually sold basically liquor to the oil field people that were actually in the oil field area. That's how he made his money, and the town just violently took over. He was a bootlegger that took over. But he was a smart bootlegger. He was doing it legally. Because up north, where they had the places where they actually would manufacture the beer more in Milwaukee and so forth, he actually got him to donate a mule, or a horse, excuse me, and a wagon, and actually did all this. All he had to do was buy the beer at half price. So he made quite a bit of money just doing this off the town and selling it to the roughnecks. Charles Bryan is taken seriously. Charles Bryan took a sample of a seep in the bed of the Frio to investors with the hope of developing a major oil field. The area was not taken seriously until 1917 when an exploratory well drilled on the J.T. Brown Ranch that blew in the capacity of 62 million cubic feet. This is the original well. We have just a picture of it that Ms. Callahan was able to give to us. This well actually, until they can actually find a way to cap the well, which they didn't know that well at the time, it was almost 62,000 barrels of oil were lost in the Callahan area before they can actually get it capped. And it's one of the strongest wells. But the problem they had at that time, they would strike gas before they actually struck oil, and they would have a lot of explosions. A lot of men lost their lives. Old Callahan thrives as a community. In 1918, J.T. Callahan, which I showed you, who was in that wagon, built a store on his ranch, and it was called Callahan. In 1922, another well struck a rich flow of oil field, and the boot town was born. In 1923, the community received its first post office. This is the original post office from the 1920s. I know you can't see that picture real well, but you know, my kids these days, if I try to get them to take a picture, everybody hides. Well, back in the 1920s, even, everybody in the whole town, you could see, got in front of the picture. And you could see Thomas Harvey, which is right there at the end with the mules. He's from Callahan. He had his prize pulling mules, and he decided to take a picture there in front. It was just a local boy that was there, a farmer, and his side. This post office was on Callahan. If you've ever been to Choke Canyon State Park, the Callahan unit, we're our recreational center. This is where the post office would have been at that time. Old Callahan becomes a boom town. During the 1920s, the town had 4 cafes, 3-story hotels, several grocery stores, a bakery, a drugstore, a pool hall, and a newspaper office, and a dance hall. Temporary classes were held at the nearby Stintz Ranch until 1928 when a brick house was built in Callahan. This is what downtown Callahan looked like. It is a very vibrant community. If you've been over to our Callahan unit where Bird Trail is, this is where the railroad ran through. You can see the track right there at the bottom, the railroad track. And the whole town, looking past Bird Trail all the way into the water, which the houses were at, where actually is where all the community was. This is how you would look in town. Mr. J.T. Callum had a problem because that big steeple over there in the back, we found out doing our research and talking to Ms. McCallahan, is actually the Baptist church. And they didn't want no liquor in town. So Mr. Callahan had to move his business outside the city limits, I guess you could say. So that was one of the big things. That's not a courthouse in our research that we found. It's actually their big church, which was actually a church. It was downtown. The post office, which I know the picture's not very well, but the post office will be at the very end where you see those trees at the very end. That's where the post office would have been at. Callahan development peaked with a population of 400 during the 30s. By 1972, 22 families remained at the original site, Callahan, by 1988, and had been moved 3 miles south of his original site, which had been inducted by the Choke Canyon Reservoir. In 2000, the community reported a population of 200 with 3 businesses. These are actually the first school children that actually attended Callahan School District. Matter of fact, Three Rivers didn't even have a gym at the time in the 1920s. They had to bus their kids to play ball and all that to the Callahan facility, to our gym. Sorry to tell you, we're going to tell you in a minute what happened to Callahan. The only thing left of Callahan today is the gym. That is all that's left. And we're going to tell you what happened. What became of Old Callahan? Through the right of eminent domain, the Bureau of Reclamation purchased the entire town and evicted the residents. No one could live under long feet of water if and when the reservoir would be fully capacited. Callahan today is known as Choke Canyon State Park, believe it or not. So if you go to Callahan today, which is actually a local rancher, if you go to, which is known in Callahan today, the little Callahan store, is actually where a local rancher donated that land and let them live there for a very cheap price, and also let them move their houses if they wanted. And that's what, if it wasn't for that rancher, I don't think the town now would even exist. Callahan would be known today without them actually doing that. But I'm going to show you what happened to the courthouse and everything here in a minute. This is the opening of the dam. The dam was first opened in 1970 in Three Rivers. City of Corpus Christi maintains it. This was actually what it looked like when they first opened it. The governor came down to Texas at the time. Everybody was just a wild, big celebration. This is the construction of Choke Canyon Reservoir. Right now where that dozer is actually it's all underwater, what happened was. Now I'm going to show you the town site, and Ms. Callahan that was very upset. She's standing there at the construction site after they mowed down all her house and everything, and basically everything was destroyed. These are the chains they used to clear the town. This is where the town was. It no longer exists. And they just piled and just went through what they did. They tied seven dozers with these huge ship chains, and they just dragged it. They cleared all the houses out, took everything down that nobody wanted. Then they just cleared the whole deal, and that's what they created, the man-made reservoir known as Choke Canyon State Park today, the reservoir. And this is her standing right there as they cleared through the whole property. She's not protesting, she's just showing where her house was at that time. Construction would have to halt because of archaeological findings that they found. There was a lot of archaeological findings. They even went back and found evidence of Paleolithic Indians that were in the area during the historical time period. Not only from the Apaches that were in the local area, Lipan Apaches, Muscalero Apaches, but also from Paleolithic Indians times. What happens, the chains just went through, and they started bringing